news was recently released that Darshan would be parting ways with CLG, and it's come as no surprise given that he has performed terrible in the spring split of 2019, even going so far as to say that he is the second worst top laner in the entire league statistically, the first being Dokla. And that says a whole lot about how far Darshan has fallen from grace, because he actually used to be a really good top laner back in the day, but this was way back in the day, right? And to go back, we can look at the history of Darshan and see where the turmoil started, because with North America's scene growing larger and larger and there being a higher talent pool for the top lane itself, whether it be through rookies from North America or with us importing talent, which obviously boosted the entire ecosystem and had to have everyone step up even further, which also alludes to why some other top laners had to retire, aka Dyrus. So let's go back in history and look at Darshan's Spartan legacy, where he first started out going to the IPL 5 tournaments way back in the day. This was like season 1 type shit. And the Go for LOL tournaments and TSM tournaments where, he would play with his longtime teammate, actually, Nintendo X, who, if you don't remember, he was a jungler and he was pretty good back in the day at the very, very start of League of Legends. And then he also had Zig, and Zig back in the day actually used to be an ADC, and you might actually know him better as the top laner previously for Phoenix 1 back in the day, like, 2 years ago. Now, his first notable team, Darshan's, was Good Game University, and this was a pretty heavy-handed team in 2013 where they would place second overall, losing to TSM in the finals. But this was a really, really good team. This was during the time where, Shifter was supposed to play for this team, but they had a mid laner by the name of Jinte who would take his spot, and he actually did a decent job at his role. But by summer, the team would end up just falling apart, placing 7th overall. And the streak was poor play continued as, Nintendo X's performance began to decline. And then Apollo was also on the team as well, too. But he couldn't find his footing alongside the fucking god-awful support Daydreamin', whose champion pool consisted of, 2 picks and, one of them was a Blitzcrank. And so that says a lot of what Apollo had to work with. But this was also at the time where Apollo actually wasn't even that great of an ADC. And then in 2014 spring, they would get 6th place, losing to Complexity Black. This was when Complexity was still within the North American LCS, which, goes way back, right? And then Darshan would finally get his big break when he joined Dignitas for 2014 summer with Crumbs and then Shifter and I'm a Cutie Pie and Kiwi Kid. This is a stack roster, aside from the shitty support. Sorry, Kiwi Kid, but you were pretty fucking bad and you did some boosted shit, which goes to show maybe that this lineup actually could have done some more miraculous things than what had already panned out, but that's for another video maybe. And this was during the time where Dignitas, they were shifting away from Skara, right? Because he got replaced by Shifter, and Skara moved over to the coaching role. And he wasn't very successful in the coaching role either. He really didn't know what he was doing. And I think Skara would admit that himself, that he just wasn't that experienced in that role. And this was also at a time to where League of Legends really hadn't figured out what the coach was even supposed to do during this time. So it's not entirely Scar's fault that he couldn't perform his duty to, a high serviceable level, because no one really could, and everyone was just spitballing. So they got 6th in the regular split and 5th in playoffs, where they lost to CLG, ironically, 1-3. And this was during a time where Dignitas figured out that Darshan was a really great split pusher, but they would still have the weakness in both the jungle and the bot lane. So they couldn't really, handle anything aside from having Darshan try to split push at the very end of the season. And after that, it really didn't work out. They tried to put him on Nasus and get him rolling that way, but the entire team would just end up collapsing. So Darshan moved to CLG for 2015, where CLG was first fined actually for poaching, and ZionSpartan couldn't play until the second week of the LCS. And so then span back over to the last weeks where they would get into playoffs, but then they lost to TL. And this was during the time where TL first got Piglet, and he was the most dominant ADC in the entire region. And then also Phoenix was this super hot mid laner coming in when Azir was meta and all the control mages. So TL were in a really, really good spot. So it's to be expected that they would lose against them anyways. And then you go into 2015 summer, and this was when Darshan was a fucking beast. This was his peak as a League of Legends player, without a doubt. I mean, he had the highest CSD at 10, and then he had the highest first blood out of any top laner in the entire league, highest gold differential at 10. Like, Darshan was an absolute monster during this time, especially on the Gnar pick, probably the best Gnar in the entire league. And that the way that they would function with him is he would get a lead because of obviously the range matchup into oftentimes tanks, right? Maokai was a pretty strong pick during this time too, but he would play Gnar, get a lead top, and then whenever there would be a play going on the opposite side of the map, he would be able to time his Mega Gnar in order to pop off or almost go off and then teleport while a fight is happening, and he would kind of obviously communicate with his team and tell them like, hey, I'm going to be a little bit late, my rage bar isn't filling, and then he would TP and just get like a double kill or a triple kill or whatever. And this was really common for Darshan and CLG as a team. They figured out exactly how to play this split push pressure style, along with Darshan just TPing for this wombo combo with the Mega Gnar. So it's really good, phenomenal on that champion. And so this was peak Darshan, or peak ZionSpartan, as I would like to say. And so CLG would then win this summer split against TSM 3-0. And this was famously when ZionSpartan brought out the Yasuo pick, right? And this threw off TSM in the first game completely because they weren't expecting it. And he got super hard pressure with this pick. Then the second game, this forced TSM to pick Yasuo, but ZionSpartan would then just get his Gnar and still crush them. So it was an answer to which TSM didn't really have. And so CLG won off of this type of meta pick and meta situation just off of, Darshan's pressure. So this was just a really big boon for them, and they would end up beating TSM in the finals. And CLG at Worlds 2015 got Coup Tigers and then Flash Wolves in their group. So, I mean, realistically, there's no way that they were going to make it out of that group anyways, because as we know, the Coup Tigers were ridiculous at that time. So skip to 2016 spring when they won against a league with high playing support, TSM, that were struggling hard and had to play 6th in the regular season. But they also CLG beat Immortals at least one time during the regular split, but then TSM also finished off Immortals in the playoffs bracket. So CLG didn't even have to play Immortals during that time, at least within the playoffs. So CLG were looking strong, yes, but their overall competition besides Immortals was looking relatively weak. And this was one of the times too where TSM would not make it into like this high playoffs bracket of first, second, or third spot. They placed all the way down in 6th. So they really didn't have a whole lot of competition. And obviously, of course, C9 was in shambles as well too. And this was at the time to where they would go for their big MSI run, right? Teams playing phenomenally. Darshan is playing really well. And they get second overall, losing to SKT in the finals. But critically, this was when CLG would play, the enchanters and the range supports to get priority bot lane. So the bot lane actually was very, very dominant during this tournament, and no one expects SKT to go down to CLG anyway. So it was a very admirable placing, and people still hold that placing in high regard even to this day, as it's the highest that a North American team has ever even placed anyways. So everything would go downhill from here. For Darshan at this point, 2017, after spring split, Xmithy left the team, and then he'd be replaced by Omar God and Dardoch. And as you very well know, yeah, sure, Dardoch performed well, but he really didn't gel with the entire team, obviously because of the toxicity issues and whatnot. So they couldn't really have him meld together with the entire team. But Darshan would get multiple MVPs during this time on his performances on champions like Jax and Gnar, which again alludes to his ability to split push and have a pressure on the other side of the map. So this was at a time where Darshan was actually still playing relatively well, even compared to his entire team, which weren't really, cohesively joining together that well as everyone would want. And so despite placing third and awaiting, C9 in the gauntlet, they failed to beat the miraculous run of C9, as High was the jungler during this time, and they ended up just climbing all their way through and destroying CLG as well too. So this shows the decline, as Darshan was playing well during that time, but moved to 2018. This was when CLG brought in Biofrost and Reignover. And when you look at this lineup, as everyone saw it, at least, this was when Reignover was on a downward trend after being on Team Liquid and basically just getting completely wrecked by the change, from the Vision meta and Korean style jungling that no longer existed. And also he came off the stint of almost being relegated on Team Liquid with such a stacked roster, to be honest, and Doublelift having to be a mercenary and go in there to save them from relegations. So this was at a time to where Reignover's stock was really low. And although Darshan would get a lot of first bloods during 2018, the team didn't have a fucking clue how to use their leads properly. And this resulted in them getting like 7th or 8th in spring and summer split respectively. And this is at a point to where you look at the CLG roster and you think, who is really going to be the leader of this roster? People suspected it might have been Huhi, as mid lane is generally a decent position to shot call from, or maybe even Reignover could shot call. But looking at just this entire roster, I could already tell that they would have shot calling problems anyways, and couldn't really develop a macro sense of identity, because none of them really have the personality for that shit. But team fails. This is about the time when Darshan would slowly start to receive criticism, but it wasn't until recently in Season 9 Spring Split where Darshan looked just really poor, often losing in simple matchups and frankly getting entirely pushed out of lane in some instances. So this was when Darshan just really fell off a cliff, and even the funny but pretty true joke is that Darshan has only looked good on Sion, calling him ZionSpartan, which is fucking hilarious. But yeah, it's true. He really only did look good on Sion, and that was his only functioning champion. And this was also at a time to where Sion as a pick really wasn't incredibly meta for the entire time of 2019 anyways. So it's very strange to see that he can't even adapt to different types of meta that are going on in 2019, even though he's this legacy player that has survived basically since Season 1 and since he's been let go from CLG. Now, as I said before, Darshan is the second statistically worse top laner ahead of Dokla, and the level of play that we've seen from top laners recently is actually pretty insane. I mean, you have what, Someday, Impact, Huni, Haunter, Licorice. Broken Blade is coming along nicely, and then Viper is coming along nicely as well too. So he's got a pretty stacked competition, and people thought back in the day, okay, well, these Korean top laners, they're never going to fully transition into the teams unless you have someone like a Huni who is just a straight carry. Haunter's always solid, and no one expected Licorice to come up. No one expected Broken Blade to come out of nowhere from, the TCL, and then Viper as well too. No one expected a One Trick to even be in the LCS. So it just blindsided everyone, to be honest. And I don't think Darshan was prepared to constantly keep having to improve this entire time. And I think that's one of the problems too, is that he just didn't want to change the play style that has to be played within whatever specific meta. And if he needs to put on the carry pants, he actually needs to tell his team that, yes, this is a viable style. Let's shift over to this. And I don't think Darshan is the personality type to clash with others, which makes him great to fit in any team environment. So I don't think that was the problem with CLG necessarily. So I'd like to see a team, which he signs to with hopefully in the summer split, embrace his split push style that he's famous for, because he's obviously shown a lot of experience with this style, and it's still meta within this current iteration of season 9. So I don't see any reason to not play towards Darshan's strengths anyways. I think as long as you have someone that already has knowledge of macro and how to control the team, just let Darshan run loose, right? I'd like to see a team embrace that type of style. Optic is certainly a choice, since they've already shown that they're willing to do a split push style and to invest in their top laner in some sense. And what's even worse is that they've invested in the worst top laner in the entire league. So if you're investing in a guy like that who isn't even better than Darshan at that type of style, then why not just pick up Darshan anyways if you can't pick up a better top laner? That's the big if, right? And it's also a bonus, as he's already played with Dardoch before and performed incredibly well when they performed together on CLG. It was just a personality clash of what have you in the rest of the team. So I think this stylistically would mesh well together for the top jungle synergy already existing, and it would enable Darshan towards his old tendencies as well too. And then if you pit him with Crown, I think this would be just a great all-around threat team with a bot lane that won't necessarily need to carry or would hard lose the lane. They could just go even or lose a little bit, but then you get this split push threat of both Crown and Darshan coming from different angles, and then you have Dardoch, which is always a solid carry if that needs to happen, but he can also enable one of these two lanes to snowball. So I just think overall this is a really good move for Optic if they can't find anyone else. Obviously they have their import slots taken up with Crown and Arrow, so that's not really an option unless they were to pick up someone like a Cody Sun or something and then get an import top. But that's a whole lot of shuffling and a whole lot of different parts that they would have to account for in terms of, trying to actually get these players. So the worst thing is that a split push style is still viable in the current meta. And with a strong mid laner like Crown, I really do think they could do a 1-3-1 threat pretty easily. Now, if Darshan goes to the Academy system, I hope he develops his shot calling skills, because this was a major problem for the lineup of CLG with Reignover and Huhi and Barfrost and Stixxay. This was a massive problem with them, as they couldn't figure out how to even close games whatsoever. And they were one of the best teams early on for like the first 10 or 15 minutes of the game, statistically. So I'm convinced that Darshan just can't function properly if there isn't a voice that can guide the game state to allow his style to succeed. That's exactly what he needs. And if he needs to build that himself, then so be it. But it has to be one way or the other. He can't not have that as a skill set either within the team or within himself. And there's also just the major problem of him seceding from lane phase. I mean, after lane phase is over, it just seems like he crumbles apart, or even during lane phase, it seems like he crumbles apart even farther, right? And this is one of his probably that's more of a big major problem that he has right now, is that he can't even really survive lane phase. So he needs to kind of go back to the fundamentals of just how to work out the lane phase properly. And once he figures that out a little bit and builds his confidence, I think he can come back into the NALCS. I'm not saying that he's going to be one of the best top laners in the league, because obviously that's occupied by Someday and Impact and Licorice. So I don't think there's a chance for him to actually fight for a top spot on the team ever again, realistically. But I think there's a chance that he can come back into the NALCS. He just needs to work on his fundamentals, his ability to shot call or to be led by someone that has good leadership, and he needs to be enabled by the rest of his team with, this split push style that he's so famous for.